So good to see everyone. Good morning. So let's begin with the Parsha very briefly, and then we will get straight to Pesach, and then we will get to our topic for today, which is the mystical meaning of the Seder plate. So starting with the Parsha this week is Parsha Tzav. Tzav means command. Hashem tells Moshe to command Aaron that the altar must always burn. There must always be a fire burning on the altar in the temple. Every day, the Kohen must go and take out. Every morning, a Kohen must go and clean up the altar from all the ashes that had burned on the previous day, and that is a mitzvah. And it teaches us the importance of not just doing things, but cleaning up after yourself too. And then it continues to go through various laws of sacrifices, continuation from last week. That is the first half of the Parsha, covers various sacrifices. And then the second half of the Parsha speaks about the inauguration of the Mishkan. In order to inaugurate the Mishkan, they had 7 days practice run where Moshe did the service and kind of Aaron followed along. But Moshe was leading the service for 7 days of practice. And then the following Parsha, we will open with the 8th day, which was the first day of the official service. And the Parsha is called Shemini 8, and we're not going to read it the following week, it's going to be Passover. Instead, we will read it in 2 weeks. The portion of Shemini about the 8th day. We're not going to have a class in 2 weeks, as I mentioned. That speaks about the inauguration of the Mishkan on the 8th day, the tragedy that happened during the inauguration of Aaron's 2 sons dying, and it also gives us at the end of the Parsha the laws of kosher animals, which birds, which fish are kosher. Yes?
Where did they get all these animals to sacrifice since they were in the middle of the desert?
Excellent question. They always had lots of animals because from the days of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they were always shepherds. Even in Egypt, they continued to raise flocks.
Where did they graze? They were in the desert.
Where did they graze in the desert? Maybe they ate manna.
Maybe. Okay.
I don't know. Great question. So this year, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, we did our Purim class. This year, Passover is very, very unusual. It's very rare where Passover begins on Saturday night. So normally the day before Pesach, the eve of Passover has a lot of important things. Today, the eve of Passover is Shabbat. And so that's going to change a number of things in how we prepare for Passover. So I'm going to try to give you now a very quick overview, rundown of Passover, its laws, its details. I'm going to try to do it in about 10, 15 minutes so that we have time for the rest of the class that you all came for. Firstly, on the eve, I'll tell you everything you need to know. On the eve of Passover, I want to say I apologize to everyone for the lack of coffee. I just discovered it now as I walked in. But hopefully after Passover we will get our coffee back. I guess they didn't supply it for whatever reason. So I know it's not the same when you expect coffee and you're missing it, right? So, but we'll have to make up with the quality of the Torah that we share. So firstly, on the eve of Passover, always, we have a custom that the firstborn males, that is, fast. Because in Egypt, Hashem smote all firstborn male Egyptians, and the firstborn male of Israel were saved. We appreciate that, and so in show our appreciation, the firstborn male of Israel, Jews, that is, fast. Only if you're the oldest in the family, whether the oldest to your father or the oldest to your mother, they might have each one of them you may have older half siblings, but even so, if you're the oldest to either parent, and you're a male, then you fast on the eve of Passover. Now this year, the eve of Passover is on Shabbat. So we are unable to fast on Shabbat because we never fast on Shabbat except when it's on Yom Kippur. And so instead, we are going to fast on Thursday. So the fast of the firstborn is on Thursday. Now, the widespread custom is that rather than fast, one is allowed to break their fast if they are a firstborn and then eat the rest of the day. If they break their fast at a celebration for a mitzvah. What would constitute a celebration for a mitzvah? Well, a wedding, but nobody gets married on the day before Passover. That's an inconvenient day to get married. Another possibility is a bris. circumcision, or a pidyon haben, redemption of the firstborn son. Those are very, very hard to plan for on the eve of Passover. We one year did have a pidyon haben, redemption of the firstborn son here on the eve of Passover. Just worked out that way. The baby was 30 days old on the eve of Passover. He was born on Purim. But it's rare. And so the way you can plan a party that is a mitzvah, other than a wedding, which is not practical, is a siyum. Finishing a book of Torah is a reason to celebrate, is a reason to make a party, and you can make a party, and then whoever partakes in the party can break their fast and does not have to fast the rest of the day. So the custom is that in every community, in the morning, right after services, someone makes a siyum, somebody who finishes a tractate makes a celebration, completing that tractate, usually of the Talmud, usually reading the last few lines of it, and then reading various prayers that we say at the end, and then all the firstborns partake in that. So we're going to do that on here in the community JCC on Thursday morning, right after services at about 7:30 a.m. So if you know any firstborn males, tell them to come here, and then they won't have to fast on Thursday. Another important thing before Passover is it's important to sell one's chametz. Last year we did a whole class on selling chametz, how it works, why it's done, but one should sell their chametz to a non-Jew before Passover. It is not practical for everyone to hire their own lawyers and to sell their chametz, and so therefore the easiest thing to do is to sign a document that appoints the rabbi as your agent to sell the chametz on your behalf. So you will appoint the rabbi, and he will do it on your behalf. It's just all it requires is a signature and your name and the addresses of where your chametz might be kept. And then on Passover, you just put your chametz aside somewhere, and that area is designated for the non-Jew who now owns your chametz. And then after Passover, they will sell it back. If you want to understand the exact details of how this whole thing works, I encourage you to listen to the podcast from last year's class. We spoke in detail how the sale of chametz works. So I do have a bunch of sale of chametz forms. I encourage you to fill it out, write your name, your addresses, and more than one address if you have more than one address, including place of work, and to sign it, and then you can hand it back to me at the end. So please pass them around. Normally, we check for chametz in our house on the eve before Passover. However, this year, we will not be checking for chametz on the eve before Passover because it's Friday night, it's Shabbat. So instead, we check for chametz a night early, which is on Thursday night. So on Thursday night, when it gets dark, we will check our homes for chametz. I think that's 7:40 something. I don't have it offhand. On Thursday, we check our homes for chametz. Our sages said we should do it with a candle, so we use a candle as we check our homes, and we go through our whole home, make sure there is no chametz there. There is a custom from the Arizal to put out 10 pieces around your house, to have someone hide 10 pieces, and then as you search for chametz, you find those 10 pieces. Yes, nightfall will be at 7:47 on Thursday. That is when you start checking for chametz, after 7:47 p.m. Then the next morning, we burn our chametz as you would normally on the eve before Passover. You cannot burn your chametz on Shabbat. So we burn our chametz the next morning. And while we are still allowed to own chametz all day on Friday and Shabbat morning until 5 hours after sunrise on Shabbat morning, even so, we still burn our chametz the time we regularly would on the eve of Passover on Friday, and that would be at 11:49 a.m. And we will have a fire here. If you don't want to make your own fires at home, you can come here. We'll have it at the JCC, and you can burn your chametz here starting at 10 a.m. on Friday morning. So the Shabbat, the Passover, as we said, is very unusual that we have Shabbat before Passover, which means that you have a bit of a challenge here because your kitchen has to be clean for Passover, and your home must be cleaned for Passover. Just to be clear, one must not own any chametz. So any chametz that one owns must be put aside and then sold to the non-Jew or destroyed. And so one must search their house and make sure there is no chametz anywhere in their house except for those designated places before Passover. Ideally, at Thursday night was when we searched for the chametz. We also are not allowed to eat anything with chametz in it. So our kitchens, we have to make sure to only buy kosher for Passover foods. Chametz, just to define it, is anything that has one of 5 grains: wheat, barley, oats, rye, or spelt. That was allowed to ferment. The assumption is that all those grains, anything that's made out of them, would have fermented in some way or another, unless one was careful to make it as matzah. So other than kosher for Passover matzah, and I should mention, just as a side point, that there are lots of matzah being sold in the stores that is not kosher for Passover. Ralph's this year is selling matzah that's not kosher for Passover. Be careful. They'll buy it. If it doesn't say, make sure it says kosher for Passover on the box. Otherwise, it's probably not kosher for Passover. Keep that in mind. If you bought it already, go back to Ralph's and tell them it's not kosher for Passover. They better give you your money back. But only matzah made out of one of these 5 grains we eat on Passover. Any other product of these 5 grains, whether breads or cookies or crackers or cereals or anything with malt in it that has one of these 5 made from one of these 5 grains, or beers or whiskeys, all of them are not kosher for Passover, and we must get rid of before Passover. Yes. Wheat, barley, oats, rye, and spelt. Corn is not chametz. Now, there is an Ashkenazic custom not to eat other grain. Ashkenazic and some Sephardic Jews do not eat other grains besides these 5 grains on Passover: corn, rice, various beans, peas, and other things. It's generally known as kitniot. And that's a widespread custom. However, you definitely can own it on Passover, and we don't have to worry about it touching our food. If it touches our food, it's not chametz. But we do avoid eating those things on Passover. Some Sephardic Jews eat all of those things, and some avoid some of those things. Ashkenazic Jews avoid a whole litany of things that we consider kitniot. But that's a subject of its own. We did a class on it a number of years ago. We spoke about it right before Passover. So on Friday night, on Shabbat, we have a bit of a problem, because you have to have your whole kitchen clean for Passover and koshered, hopefully, for Passover, with only kosher for Passover food. And you have your whole house kosher for Passover. You're not allowed to own chametz or have any chametz in your kitchen. But you also need to have your Shabbat meal. What are you going to eat for your Shabbat meal? So Friday night, in theory, you can eat matzah. There are many Jews that have a custom not to eat matzah in the 2 weeks or even 4 weeks before Passover. But according to halacha, you can. So you can eat matzah instead, and as part of your meal, instead of challah. But then, Shabbat morning, you have a problem. Shabbat morning, you're not allowed to eat chametz after 4 hours into the day, which will be at, I'll give you the exact time, which will be at 10:43 a.m. And then you have to remove all chametz from your property by 11:49 a.m. Now, on the day before Passover, our sages forbade you from eating matzah, because they didn't want you to they wanted you to look forward to the matzah that night. So they didn't want you to eat matzah that day. So we're forbidden from eating matzah that day. So now when you have a Shabbat meal, you need 2 loaves of bread. What are you going to use? So what is widely done is as follows. We prepare our Shabbat dinners Friday night and our Shabbat lunch on Shabbat with regular kosher for Passover food from our kosher for Passover kitchen. And then what we do is we get 2 small challahs, and we eat them away from everything else in either at a different table or in a specific area where you make sure you don't leave any crumbs, because you don't want any crumbs in your home. You don't want any crumbs to get into your food. You eat the challah, you brush it off, you remove or get rid of all the crumbs, and then you go back to your Passover food. We do the same thing Shabbat morning, where we do the Kiddush, we eat our challah for lunch. We have to eat it before 10:43 a.m. And then we go on and we eat our regular Passover meal, our Passover lunch. The only catch is on Shabbat morning, in order to do that, you have to start your lunch super early because you got to finish the challah part of your lunch at least before 10:43 a.m. So although we normally do daven here at 10 a.m. every Shabbat, this Shabbat we're going to be davening here at 7:30 a.m. In order that we're done by 9:30 a.m., you'll have enough time to go home, have your challah and everything, and be done by 10:43, and then go on to your Shabbat lunch.
What about cleaning up all the crumbs?
Now you have to clean all the crumbs. You could sweep them all, and then you could either throw them outside, flush them down the toilet, or something to make them, get rid of them. Throwing them in the garbage doesn't really help because the garbage is still in your home, right? You got to get them out of your home, right? But you got to throw them outside, the crumbs.
I'm eating more cookies so they don't have to get thrown out.
Yeah, very good. Eat them all now.
What time does it actually start on Friday? Saturday night.
So let me get to that. That's going to be our next part. Okay. So now Shabbat, otherwise it's a pretty regular Shabbat. It's the day before Passover, but it's a regular Shabbat. And Passover, Pesach starts on Saturday night. I should mention that in order to light candles on Saturday night, you will need a pre-existing flame because we don't strike matches on Yom Tov. We do light fires, but we do not strike matches. So you need to use an existing flame. You can do that by lighting a 24-hour candle, even better because you're also going to need one on Sunday night. So you could get a 48-hour candle and light it before the Shabbat, before you light your Shabbat candles. And that way you'll be able to light your holiday candles. So now for the Saturday night. So it's the Saturday night is when we do our Seder. It's the first night of Passover. Firstly, just in general about the Seder. It is important that every single Jew go to a Seder. There are many mitzvahs that we need to do at the Seder. I will go over some of them in just a moment. But we definitely don't want anyone to miss out on a Seder. It is our annual time that we recount our tradition going back to Moses, where parents give over the tradition to the next generation, where we essentially experience our Judaism in a very experiential way. So the Seder is extremely, extremely important that everyone go to a Seder. So if you are making your own Seder, I strongly encourage you, or you are going to a Seder, and you can bring guests, I strongly encourage you to reach out to every single Jew you know and invite them to join the Seder. Whether your own Seder or your other people's Seder that you are going to, encourage everyone to go to a Seder. If you don't yet have plans to go to a Seder yourself, I encourage you to either make a Seder or go to a Seder. And encourage everybody that you know to come to a Seder as well. Because a lot of people don't have their own Seder, we at the JCC create a Seder here on both nights of Passover. There's two Seders, I should point out. Saturday night and Sunday night. In the diaspora, we do two Seders. Both are important. One should go to two Seders. So we have two Seders here at the JCC. One is going to start here on Saturday night at 7 p.m. And the second one is going to start on Sunday night at 8:30 p.m.
Why is it so late?
Why is it so late? Very good question. Seders are late. That's the way they're done. It's later than the first one. I'll soon explain why we do the first one early. But really, 8:30 is the better time to do it.
Why is it so much later than the
What he's going to say.
I'm going to soon explain. But so Seders are late. It's okay. It's the one night a year, 2 nights a year that you stay up late. And you have a whole Saturday to sleep, right? If you want. So a whole Shabbat to sleep. So if you don't yet have plans for the Seder, I encourage you to come to our Seder. We do have a fee for our Seder in order to cover our own costs because we get it catered, and the catering cost for Passover food is ridiculously expensive because of the process that it goes through to make kosher for Passover food. However, we also do not want any Jew to miss out on a Seder. So if you or anyone you know are hesitant to come to a Seder because of the fee, just let me know, and I'd be glad for you to come as my personal guest, or for all your friends to come as my personal guest with no cost whatsoever. Every Jew is welcome at our Seder, regardless of whether they're able to pay or not. So definitely encourage everyone to join our Seder if you haven't yet. If you don't have plans, or you know someone who doesn't yet have plans, you don't have to ruin your own Seder or the Seder you're going to, please encourage them to come to our Seder. Now, what does the Seder itself entail? So one thing before I start that we've spoken about before, it is important that at the Seder that everyone eat matzah. The kind of matzah that we eat is shmura matzah. Shmura matzah has two important advantages. Firstly, the Torah says, "Ushmartem et hamatzah." You must guard the matzah. Matzah must be guarded, meaning someone must watch the wheat from the moment it is harvested all the way until it makes it into your matzah and comes out of the oven. It must be guarded and supervised the whole time with hashgacha, with supervision, to make sure that it did not come in contact with any liquid. And the second thing that we need, that the matzah at the Seder should have, is it should be made specially with the intent, by the people making it, with the intent to be used as matzah at the Seder. So for those two reasons, it's important to use matzah that was both guarded and handmade, because machines do not have any intent when they do things. And so it needs to be made by hand. And so we therefore, because most of the stores don't carry handmade shmura matzah, because handmade shmura matzah is very expensive. And the machine-made non-shmura matzah is very cheap. So therefore, most stores don't carry it. Costco does carry it in case you want to buy it. We also carry it here, sell it here. But we give out 2 matzahs to every Jew that we know, 1 for each Seder, so you should at least have 1 shmura matzah at each Seder. Many of you have volunteered already to give out matzah. For anyone who did not yet get shmura matzah for themselves and is not planning to come here, is making their own Seder or going to a different Seder, I have shmura matzah here, and before you leave, please come and take a box of shmura matzah. So moving on to the Seder. So the Seder must be done on the first night of Passover. Night we know begins when 3 stars are visible outside. When are, according to Jewish law, when are 3 stars visible? So it varies on this various ways to define that. Because it's Saturday night, we take a bit of a stricter view than we normally would. It's about 10 minutes later than it normally would be. But that would be on Saturday night at 8:01 p.m. That means that you cannot, evening services don't begin before 8:01 p.m. You cannot start your Seder with the first cup of wine before 8:01 p.m. So what do you do? What if people, when you tell someone that your Seder starts at 8:01, they don't want to come to such a Seder, right? Because it's too late for them, right? So what's the solution? So we here have that same problem. We have a big Seder for the community, but we found that when we call it for 8 or 8:30, people don't come to the Seder because they find it too late. So our solution has been that we call our Seder for 7 p.m. What do you do from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m.? So there's another problem with the Seder, and that is that the Seder, everyone knows probably what the Seder is famous for, is that you first read the Haggadah, which takes a very long time, and only afterwards do you eat matzah and then eat your meal, which means that your meal often doesn't come until about an hour or 2 into your Seder, right? So people sit there on hungry stomachs. Now, we found that to be very problematic when we have big crowds, because trying to keep a big crowd under control on a hungry stomach doesn't work too well. So what the solution that we've come up with, well, not we, but that has been come up with, and many people do this today, and you're welcome to do this at home yourself, is to start off with food. Not matzah, can't eat matzah till later, but start off with food other than matzah. We offer the first course, fish and salads, and you can even offer your first courses, whatever it might be, at 7 o'clock when you start your Seder, and let people eat. And then they don't have an empty stomach, and they don't have, you started your Seder a little earlier, and then everybody is ready to make Kiddush when the time comes at 8:01. So that's what we're going to be doing on the first night. On the second night, because unfortunately many Jews don't make the effort to go to the Seder the second night, we've found that the people who are coming the second night are usually not that hesitant to come to a later Seder. So we therefore do it the traditional way and schedule it for later. Yes?
Can you have wine before?
You can drink wine, but it doesn't count for your 4 cups. So if you don't want to be stuck not able to drink 4 cups, I recommend you don't drink wine.
Or have an Uber?
You don't drink wine during dinner, but wait until Seder.
Don't drink wine during this dinner. Wait till Seder. Yes. And you don't have to have what we do is we just offer 1 course beforehand because you want to have your main dinner later, right? Okay. So the Seder itself requires the following things. We already mentioned the matzah. It requires 4 cups of wine. There is a debate in Jewish law about drinking grape juice, but if you have trouble drinking wine, definitely you should drink grape juice. It works too, but it should be wine or grape juice, not something else. However, although 4 cups of wine sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, even 4 cups of grape juice is a lot of sugar. Even so, it actually depends on how you do it, because there's a minimum size for a cup. Like there's a size for everything in Torah. We once did a class about sizes. The minimum size of a cup is 86 milligrams, which is just over 3.5 ounces. So if you get a 4-ounce cup, if you have a 4-ounce cup, and at my Seder, those that have been to my Seders know, we use 4-ounce cups because there's no reason to have an enormous amount of wine with a big goblet. You won't be able to drink the whole glass, and the mitzvah is to drink the full glass. So get yourself a small cup, a 4-ounce cup, and then you can drink 4 cups of wine. Also, you don't necessarily need to have wine that is 12 or 15% alcohol if you have trouble with large amounts of alcohol. Today, there are plenty of wines that are like beers, 3%, 4% alcohol. You could buy kosher wines, great wines you could buy in the kosher stores that are very low alcohol content, made specially for the Seders, for people that don't like high alcohol. And if you drink four 4-ounce cups of 3% alcohol, you'd probably be okay.
Is Manischewitz low?
I don't know. It's definitely very high in sugar.
Oh, okay. I know it's sweet.
We once did a class on kosher wine. I probably should mention it again. A fellow at Ralph's over here that does the wine once complained to me, I don't understand. There's so many great kosher wines, and all they want is Manischewitz. And I said, I don't understand it either. I think Manischewitz is simply nostalgia. The story of Manischewitz, very briefly, is that Manischewitz and Manischewitz style, there's a couple other brands that do the same. The story briefly is that when Jews in Europe mainly got their wines from Southern Europe, from Italy, because there was plenty of kosher wine production in Italy and France, and they would be imported into Northern Europe where no grapes grow. When Jews came to New York, they didn't have the ability to bring in wine from Europe. It was too complicated, too expensive. And they didn't really have big Jewish communities in California to produce kosher wine for them. And so they discovered that there is actually a grape that grows in cold climate called the Concord grape, which is a sickeningly sweet grape. And so they started making kosher wine with this Concord grape. And that led to New York Jews getting used to drinking these very, very sweet kosher wines. And so a lot of Jews over time, their nostalgic remembrance of the only thing they remember about their Judaism is that Jews drink sweet wines. It was an American thing that started here in New York. It wasn't true historically, and most Jews still today don't drink sweet wines. And they're not very good, frankly. I think at some point, Manischewitz even began adding sugar to its Concord grape to make it even more sweet. But there's plenty of great kosher wines in Trader Joe's, in Ralph's, definitely in Total Wine, or you could even go to the kosher stores where they have an even bigger selection.
And wines is kosher, right? It's so kosher for Passover.
No, all wine's kosher for Passover. Yes.
Can you dilute it with water?
Can you dilute wine with water? That's an excellent question. Absolutely, you can dilute wine with water. The Talmud says that you can dilute as long as it's more than 1/3 wine. You can mix it with water. That's another solution. Excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up. Good solution.
What?
As long as you have at least 1/3 wine, you're good. So.
There you go.
So we drink, so at the Seder, just very briefly, I'm going to go through the Seder very briefly, I'll go through the rest of Passover. I know I'm well over time, but I want to get to the mystical Seder plate. So at the Seder, we drink these 4 cups of wine. You should fill your cup to the top so it overflows. Those who have been to my Seders know that I encourage everyone to make sure it fills to the top and overflows. Drink the entire cup all the way down to the bottom. So it's drink 4 full cups. Again, it doesn't have to be big cups. You can even mix it with water. It doesn't have to be high content alcohol, but drink 4 full cups. We then, at the Seder, we then wash our hands. We eat a vegetable and dip it in salt water. It can be any vegetable. The children then ask the Manishtana the 4 questions. We then recite the Haggadah. At the end of the Haggadah, we drink our 2nd cup of wine. We then wash our hands for the matzah. We eat the matzah. When we eat the matzah, it's important to note that when we eat, we did a class a couple months ago where we spoke about sizes in Judaism. Every mitzvah has an amount, how much you have to do. How much eating is eating. Eating a few crumbs doesn't count as eating. You got to really eat matzah. How much matzah do you have to eat? So there's some debate about this, like almost everything in Judaism, but ideally one should eat 28 grams worth of matzah, which is an ounce of matzah. Those big shmura matzahs that we give out, those are each 2 ounces. So if you eat half of those, you've eaten an ounce. So everyone should try to eat 1 ounce of matzah. If you don't eat an ounce of matzah, you haven't eaten. It's not that much. An ounce is a little amount. It's just very wide and thin. That's why it looks big. But it's not that much to eat. But that's ideally how much everyone should eat in order to fulfill their obligation of matzah. We then eat maror, bitter herbs. The primary maror that we use is romaine lettuce. It's important to note that when eating romaine lettuce, and this is year-round, we did a class on this one also, it's important to know that you need to check the romaine lettuce for bugs. Every time we eat lettuce, we check for bugs. If you're eating the organic lettuce, it's even more full of bugs. Yesterday, I sat with my daughter as I was checking lettuce, and I showed her all the tiny, tiny green bugs sometimes. They're very hard to see in the romaine lettuce. I showed her all the different bugs that was in the lettuce that she was about to chew on. So you have to remove all those bugs. Yes?
You can get rid of them by rinsing 3 times with vinegar and water.
Yeah,
A little bit of vinegar and water, let it sit, shake it, rinse it, do it again, rinse it, and do it again, and then you can check it. All the bugs should be gone. Okay. I think a little bit of vegetable soap. Does it? I just use vinegar.
Okay. So So anyway, then we eat the maror. There's an Ashkenazi custom to add horseradish. Talk about that in a moment. And then we make a sandwich of matzah and maror together. When we eat maror, also you got to eat a sizable amount. Also, we eat about an ounce of maror, which is about 2 large leaves, is about an ounce. And then we have our meal, and then after our meal, we eat the afikomen, which had been separated earlier, and then following that we drink our 3rd cup of wine. Let's do the blessing after the meal, and then we do the Hallel, the praises to Hashem, and we drink our 4th cup of wine. We do the same thing on the first night of Passover. We do the same thing on the 2nd night of Passover. On the 2nd night of Passover, we again light candles. An additional thing that we do on the 2nd night of Passover is we begin counting the Omer. Every night from the 2nd night of Passover, we count 49 days until Shavuot. It's a mitzvah to count. You can get today Omer apps, Omer books that have the Omer. It's in your prayer books as well. And I encourage you to begin counting the Omer. That will be next Sunday night. And just briefly, the first 2 days of Passover Sunday and Monday, so from Saturday night all the way till Monday evening, when it gets dark, is Yom Tov, when we do not work. We do not do most of the things that are forbidden on Shabbat. Then the next 4 days, meaning from Monday night all the way till Friday night, are what we call Chol HaMoed, the mundane days of the festival. It's still Passover. We still don't eat chametz, but we are allowed to work on those days, although it's better not to. And then the final 2 days of Passover are Yom Tov once again, the 7th and 8th days of Passover. That is starts on Friday night, next Friday night, that is, a week from Friday night. And it ends on Sunday night, which is the fourth. So it begins on the 12th in the evening. It begins on the 18th of April in the evening, and it ends on the 20th of April, Sunday night, after it gets dark. I can give you the exact time in just a moment. Until for those 8 days of Passover, we do not eat chametz, and only after Passover ends on Sunday night, April 20th, do we then eat chametz. It ends at 8:08 p.m. Sunday night, April 20th. That's the end. That's when Passover ends. And so that's Passover in short. Hopefully we covered the important things. Sorry, we've taken much of the class already on this, but I want to now get to, I know we have questions, but let's do this. Hold your questions, because I feel bad to keep everyone too long after, too late. So let's first do our class on the Seder plate that we had planned and we had advertised, and then we will get to any questions people have about Passover. Again, don't forget to fill out these sale of chametz forms, and don't forget that before you leave, we have the shmor matzah to give out to you. So the Seder is one of the most important and most complicated events in the Jewish year. The Seder has multiple different parts to it, multiple different requirements from the Torah, biblical commands, rabbinic commands. Over the year, there are more and more customs and traditions that are added. We have the book of the Haggadah, which both gives us the text to read and the order instructions of what we're supposed to do. Now, many of the customs and traditions of the Seder, both those, there are some customs and traditions that are universal, meaning all Jewish communities do them. Some are unique to particular Jewish communities. But all of them have deep significance, and often there is deep mystical significance to things at the Seder. So today I want to focus on one particular item at the Seder, which is the Seder plate, or in Hebrew, the ka'ara, which is plate, the traditional Seder plate. Many people have have kind of a silver plate with cloths on top of it. Some people have these nice big, tall silver plates for their Seder plate. You may have seen different forms. Some people just have a plain plate. You may have seen different forms of Seder plate. There are different structures, but the Seder plate has both deep halachic significance, meaning the rules, the laws, as well as deep mystical significance. So I want to just spend a couple minutes talking about the Seder plate, the history of it, what the Seder plate exactly is supposed to look like, and the different customs, and the mystical significance of the Seder plate. So our first source that tells us the Seder is actually found in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the first work of our oral tradition. The Mishnah gives us, in chapter 10 of Psachim, gives us essentially a quick structure of what the Seder should look like. And the Mishnah tells us that after drinking the first cup of wine, before the children begin to ask the 4 questions, we should take away the table. Why do we take away the table? The goal is that the children are going to start asking, why are you taking away the table before eating? And hopefully that will lead them to asking other questions as well. And that is kind of the introduction to the 4 questions. And we do a number of things at the Seder to get the kids to start asking questions. Now, then the table should be brought back after the questions before you start reading the Haggadah. Now, how do you move your table in the middle of your meal? So in those days, It's important to remember things in context. In those days, Roman times, when the Mishnah was written around the late 2nd century, in those days, dinners were served on couches. In other words, not just when someone ate their quick meal, but if you had a nice dinner where you invited guests, they would be served on couches. Everybody would lean. They didn't really have chairs back then. Chairs weren't in wide. They had chairs, but they weren't popular. They sat on the floor, as they still do in many parts of the world. For informal things, for formal things, they would lie on couches. And they would lie always on their left side on these couches. And they would not be sitting around the table. They would be sitting around the room on couches, but they would, or lying in a kind of semi-lying position on couches, but they would not have one table. Rather, the waiters would bring in these little tables that had their food on it to each person. Instead of the waiters bringing in plates, as they would today in a plated dinner, they would bring in actually a table with your food on it. That's what was done then. So at this point, after the first cup, you have the waiters take away the little table, and then the kids want to know, why'd you take away the table with the food before you started eating? Now, today we no longer eat on couches anymore. For whatever reason, Europeans were not big fans of eating on couches, and they started eating on chairs and tables, and that's kind of become universal today. Everyone eats on couches and tables. We don't have small tables where everyone at the dinner gets their own little table anymore. Rather, everyone today at a dinner sits around a big table. So it's not really practical to remove the table anymore. Instead, what we have is a plate. So this plate first started when we stopped using small tables, which was probably started when Jews came to Europe, and the Europeans were not fans of having dinners with small tables, and so they started using big tables, and as a result, rather than moving the table, they started to move the plate. They would remove the plate. Now, that we no longer remove the plate. In actuality, there's different customs. In some communities, they bring the plate after the 4 questions are asked. So but when they begin reading the Haggadah. In most Jewish communities, they have the plate there from the beginning of the Seder, and then they move the plate back a little when the 4 questions are asked, and then they push it away from them, and then they bring the plate back when they begin, reading the Haggadah. So this plate has now become an important part of the Seder, this plate that gets moved. Now, generally, the Seder plate, in most houses, only the leader of the Seder, and every Seder has its Seder leader, the person running the show, the leader, often the head of the host in the home, who's hosting the Seder, but there's always a Seder leader. So in most households, only the Seder leader gets a Seder plate. In some communities, all the men or all the heads of households, in other words, if you have multiple families together, each kind of head of household gets their own Seder plate. But this plate over the years has developed enormous significance because it holds all the important items that we need for the Seder. So what goes on this Seder plate? So the first thing that goes on the Seder plate is the matzah. At the Seder, we're going to eat matzah. It's the most important mitzvah of the night. That matzah, that handmade shmura matzah, goes on your Seder plate. Now, matzahs are very big. So this is not a little 10-inch plate. This is, or 7, what size they have, but this is not a little small plate. This is, the matzahs themselves are this big. Are big. So you need a big plate to hold your matzah, right? That's at least the size of the matzah. So we have matzah at the plate, on your plate. Not just one matzah though. The custom is to have 3 matzahs. Most, at least. Some have 2, but the custom among most communities is to have 3 matzahs. Why 3 matzahs? Well, every Shabbat and festival, whenever we make a blessing on the challah, we always make a blessing on 2 challahs. Why? Shabbat is special, and because Shabbat is special, everything should be double. And therefore, since just as we light 2 candles, we have 2 challahs, everything on Shabbat is doubled, and therefore we always make a blessing on 2 challahs, every Shabbat and every festival. Passover too, we want to make a blessing on 2 whole matzahs. You don't want to make a blessing on a broken piece. That's not nice for the blessing. You want that blessing to be on a whole piece. So you make a blessing on 2 whole matzahs. However, we also are supposed to have matzah in front of us when we recite the Haggadah and tell the story of the Exodus. But the Torah says that the matzah that we have when we tell the story of the Exodus should be lechem oni, a poor man's bread. Poor man's bread, said our sages. Well, matzah in general is poor man's bread, but poor man's bread is that it's a half a piece. Poor men don't have kind of for a whole piece of bread. They only have a half a piece. So you should say the Haggadah with a broken matzah. So before you start reciting the Haggadah, you have to, one of the steps of the Seder is breaking the matzah. So you got to break the matzah. So you can't make hamotzi on a broken matzah. You have a broken matzah and 2 whole matzahs. Together that makes 3 matzahs. So we therefore need to have 3 matzahs on our Seder plate. Rav Shura Gaon, who lived in the 9th century, was once asked to explain why 3 matzah. Is there any deeper significance to the 3 matzah? And he said yes. The Torah tells us how 3 guests came to visit Abraham. They turned out to be angels. And Abraham went to great lengths to care for his guests. Now we know that that day that they came was the eve of Passover, because that night would they continue going on to the home of Abraham's nephew Lot in Sodom, and Lot baked matzah for them. Why would he bake matzah? It must have been Passover. And Abraham was keeping the laws of the Torah before they were actually given. So it was the eve of Passover, and the Torah says that when Abraham describes in great detail how Abraham cared for his guests, and he turned to his wife Sarah, and he told her, hurry, go take 3 se'ah of fine flour, knead them, and make them into loaves. And so because they use 3 se'ah, therefore we should use 3 matzahs. Furthermore, he points out that the number 3 is very important in Judaism, because there are 3 fathers: Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The great mystic, the great Kabbalistic teacher, the Arizal, who we've spoken about before, he explains that the 3 matzahs actually correspond to 3 types of Jews. The Jewish community is split into 3 groups: Yisraelim, the regular 12 tribes; Leviim, people from the tribe of Levi; and Kohanim, who served in the temple, descendants of Aaron. So it refers to these 3 types of Jews: Yisraelim, Leviim, and Kohanim. Now, the previous Rebbe pointed out that the acronym of these 3, Yisraelim, Leviim, and Kohanim, if you take the first letter of each one, Yisraelim, a Yud or Y, Leviim, an L, right, or a Lamed, and Kohanim, right, a Kaf or a K, together will make the word Yelech. Yelech means you should go. And it reminds us how in life we have to continue moving. We are never stationary. He will go. He will go. He will go. Yes. In life, we're never stationary. In the book of Zechariah, it says that you humans, the prophet speaking, the angel speaking to Zechariah says, you are a mahalech. You are goers among those standers. Who are goers? Well, angels are standing. They never move. They're static. They don't grow. They do the same thing day in, day out. They don't change. Humans change and grow. We have the ability to constantly grow. And that's unique, but we have to constantly be growing, because otherwise, if we're not growing, we are shrinking. So we got to make sure to consistently grow. And we'll soon point out some other important references from the Arizal about these 3 matzahs that go on our Seder plate. Yes?
You said angels stand.
Mm-hmm.
What about the angels that visited Abraham?
They don't grow, standing in the sense that they don't grow.
Oh, they don't grow.
In addition to matzah, there are other important items placed on the Seder plate. They include, we put a vegetable, at least those that bring the Seder plate at the beginning of the Seder, put a vegetable on it. The vegetable is something that we eat right after drinking the first cup. After we drink the first cup, we wash our hands, and then we eat a vegetable dipped in salt water. Various reasons given for that vegetable. We're told that we eat it in order again. The children will ask, why are you eating a vegetable dipped in salt water? It's a strange thing to do, in order to get the children to ask questions, right? But the vegetable has significance because it grows in the ground and it reminds us of the hard labor that Israel worked, and the salt water reminds us of the tears of Israel. So we eat this vegetable. So the vegetable must go on the Seder plate. There are varying customs. The widespread custom is to use celery. I think that was widely found. Celery, that was widely found in Eastern Europe. Some people use carrot. Some people use onion, potatoes. There are various different customs as to which.
Parsley.
Parsley? You could use parsley. Sorry? Parsley? You can use parsley. They all work. Use parsley. Okay, they all work. Any vegetable works. In addition, on the Seder plate, we have to have 2 cooked foods. Why? They remind us of the 2 sacrifices that when the temple stood and you made your Seder in Jerusalem, your Seder included 2 sacrifices. Firstly, you would have a Chagiga sacrifice that was offered in the morning on the eve of Passover, and the Chagiga sacrifice would be the main kind of meal that you would have. That would be the main meat that you would eat at your Seder. And then at the end of the Seder, instead of the Afikoman, before today we have the Afikoman to commemorate it, but at the end of the Seder, after eating all your food, you would eat then the Passover sacrifice. So to commemorate these 2 sacrifices, we have 2 cooked foods on our Seder plate. The custom is that one of these foods should be roasted. Now, in temple times, when the temple stood and we offered a Passover sacrifice, it was a mitzvah for the Passover sacrifice to be roasted, right? It was roasted on a spit over an open flame, and the entire animal together. That's how the Passover sacrifice had to be prepared. So they would roast the animal. So therefore, while the Passover sacrifice was roasted, one of the things that our sages struggled with the destruction of the temple, and even before that, was people really missed bringing the Passover sacrifice. So some people attempted to bring their own Passover sacrifice without a temple. And that would, of course, be forbidden under Jewish law, because we are forbidden to bring a sacrifice outside of the temple. So our sages therefore said, in order to avoid doing anything that may look or be construed as someone bringing the Passover sacrifice outside the temple, they said, at your Seder, do not have any roasted meat. Avoid all roasted meat. And so we therefore do not eat roasted meat, roasted over an open flame, that is. We do not eat at the Seder. If you roast it in an oven with water and liquids, then that's okay. But we're talking about roasted over an open flame, barbecued. So we don't have any barbecued meat at the Seder. So the custom is that we do barbecue a piece of meat, and that piece of meat is placed on the Seder plate to commemorate the Passover sacrifice, but not eaten. What piece of meat do we barbecue? So the custom is to use the zroa, or the arm, usually the leg, the shank bone of the animal, to remind us of Hashem's arm, Hashem's outstretched arm, zroya netuya, that he used to take us out of Egypt, referring to the great miracles that he used in the Exodus. And so therefore we use a shank bone of a lamb, and roast it, put it on the Seder plate, but do not eat it. It's forbidden to eat roasted meat at the Seder. Some have a custom. Our custom is to, rather than using roasted meat, which can be, again, construed as a sacrifice, we don't want anyone to get confused. Instead, we use chicken and we roast a chicken bone, usually the neck, which is something that isn't really edible. We roast the neck bone, and we put that on our Seder plate. The second cooked food, again, could be any cooked food to remind us of the Chagiga sacrifice. However, the Jerusalem Talmud says that we should use an egg. Why should we use an egg? So the Jerusalem Talmud says that in Aramaic, which was the spoken language of Jews during that period, the Aramaic word for egg is be'ah. Be'ah in Aramaic also means a request. And it is symbolizing that we are requesting of Hashem to restore, to bring Moshiach and restore the temple so that we should be able to bring the sacrifice. In addition, it is said that the egg reminds us of a home of mourning. We know when a family comes back from the funeral and begins the Shiva, the first meal that they eat, called the Havara meal, eaten at the Shiva, is they eat hard-boiled eggs, bagels and hard-boiled eggs. So the hard-boiled egg symbolizes the mourning, and we want to symbolize mourning at the Seder to symbolize the mourning of the destruction of the temple. So for that reason, we have the hard-boiled egg. So again, the custom is to have a roasted piece of meat, shank bone, or some again use a chicken neck, and a hard-boiled egg as the two foods that you eat, two roasted foods that you put on your Seder plate. They are not required to be eaten. The roasted meat we do not eat regardless. We're forbidden from eating it. The egg we can eat, and the custom is to eat it later during your meal. It's not part of the Seder, official Seder things that you have to eat.
Rabbi,
Yes?
could you just real quick the connection between the egg and the destruction of the temple?
So two things. Firstly, the egg, the Aramaic word for egg is be'ah. Right? What's the connection between the egg and the destruction of the temple? Firstly, the Aramaic word for egg is be'ah, which also means request. We are requesting Hashem to restore the temple. Secondly, the egg is eaten as part of the first meal that mourners eat when they begin their Shiva. Right? We have a special meal called the Sudas Havara, and in that meal is made up of bagels and eggs, and hard-boiled eggs, and therefore the egg reminds us of the mourning, and we are mourning for the destruction of the temple. So far on our Seder plate we have 3 matzahs, and in addition we also have 2 cooked foods. Custom again is a roasted meat and an egg, as well as the vegetable. In addition, on our Seder plate, we must also have charoset. Charoset is this is a mixture. It's supposed to be a paste-like mixture to remind us of the mortar that they used to make bricks and to build buildings in Egypt. The charoset is supposed to be sweet because it sweetens the maror, the bitter herbs. There are many, many different recipes to make charoset. Every community had a different custom to make charoset. It generally includes fruit, nuts, and some include wine. That's the Ashkenazic custom. But the exact details of what to put in charoset varies. I hope in future to do a class dedicated to charoset because it is so complicated and there's so many different possibilities. Cooking class, yeah. But we should not only we dip our maror into our bitter herbs into charoset, but we also should have charoset in front of us when we are reading the Haggadah, when we're telling the story, to have our sample of the mortar sitting in front of us when we speak about how Israel worked hard. And then the final thing on the Seder plate is the maror, the bitter herbs. Now, the Mishnah mentions various different things that can be taken for maror, for bitter herbs. The best thing to use, we are told in the Talmud, is chazeret, which is romaine lettuce. That is the ideal maror, the ideal bitter herbs. Now, it's already been pointed out in medieval times that the romaine lettuce does not taste particularly bitter. However, that's when it's fresh, it does not taste bitter. But if you leave it for a few days, it does begin to get more bitter over time. And similar to the Israel's enslavement that began pretty mildly, and then it got worse over time. So the primary food is romaine lettuce. However, in Eastern Europe, Ashkenazi Jews were unable to get romaine lettuce, which does not grow in that time of year. It's still cold, April time. It's still fairly cold there, and you cannot get romaine lettuce in Eastern Europe. And so, therefore, they would often use horseradish. Horseradish is another thing that can be used for maror. Tamcha, it's in Aramaic, and we can use it. And so horseradish is something that can survive for months. And like potatoes, it's a root vegetable, and so they would use horseradish instead. Still, those that could would try to get romaine lettuce. Definitely the ideal. Even if someone wants to use horseradish today, and many still do, the ideal is still to use romaine lettuce, which today is very readily available, very, very easy to get.
The horseradish, do you know who carries? Oh, hard horseradish.
Everybody carries horseradish. It shouldn't be hard to get kosher horseradish. Ground horseradish, that is. You're looking for ground horseradish.
No, the hard one.
The pieces, most of them carry it too. You want to grind your own. Yeah, they're all raw. Horseradish is always raw. You could buy the pre-ground horseradish, or you can buy the root itself and grind it yourself. That's of course the most important preparation for Passover. Is someone has the job of grinding the horseradish, right? And of course, God forbid to ever use a food processor to grind the horseradish. I don't know why people don't want to, but yes.
Is couscous okay?
Couscous?
Yeah.
No, couscous is a type of pasta made from wheat, and it would be chametz.
Okay.
Now, there is kosher for Passover couscous, which is, I believe, made. So, just in general, we're off topic, but I'm just going to mention very quickly. There are kosher for Passover things that are made from either matzah flour or potato starch. So there are kosher Passover pastas, but regular couscous is chametz. Let's get back to our Seder plate. So we now have on the Seder plate 3 matzahs according to most customs. We have 2 cooked foods, usually a roasted meat, either the shank bone or a chicken neck, and a hard-boiled egg. We have charoset, and we have the bitter herbs, generally romaine lettuce, or you can also use horseradish. Now, how do you put them on your Seder plate? So Rabbi Yehuda Leib Molin, known as the Maharil, was a 15th century German sage, and he's considered the father of Ashkenazi custom. And he was very, very careful about custom and collected custom, and many of the Ashkenazi customs can be traced back to the Maharil. The Maharil said that we should make the Seder plate in a way that we never have to pass over one thing to get to the next thing, right? To get to what we need to. So therefore, he said, because you never want to pass over something that you could do a mitzvah with now, it's unfair to it. You're stretching over it to reach the next thing. So therefore, he said, put them on your Seder plate in order. In the very front of the Seder plate, you should put your vegetable and your salt water. That's the first thing you're going to eat. Then behind it, put your 3 matzahs. That's the next thing you're going to eat. Behind it, put your mari or bitter herbs and charoset. That's the next thing you're going to eat. And behind it, you should put your 2 cooked foods, which do not need to be eaten at the Seder. So he envisioned kind of this very, very large plate with matzah sitting, with the vegetable sitting in the front, matzah behind it, 3 matzahs behind it, maror and charoset behind it, and the 2 cooked foods in the back. So, however, and that seems to have been widely done by Ashkenazi Jews and perhaps by most Jews until the days of the Arizal. The Arizal lived in the 16th century. The Arizal, as we spoke about when we did our class on the Arizal, made many, many innovations to Judaism based on Kabbalah, to Jewish custom, that is, based on Kabbalah. The Arizal explained that the Seder plate has 10 different parts to it. These 10 parts correspond to the 10 Sfirot. We've previously done a class on the 10 Sfirot, but just briefly. Kabbalah explains, the Zohar explains, that when Hashem created our universe, he used 10 tools in creation. And these tools are called the Sfirot. Hashem then made man in his image, where a human mind is made up of these same 10 Sfirot we have in the human mind itself. Without getting into the details of the 10 Sfirot, the Sfirot themselves are split into two parts. The first three are intellectual Sfirot and represent three parts of the human intellect. And Hashem has corresponding Sfirot. The next 7 are emotional Sfirot and represent part of the human emotion. And therefore, the 10 parts of the Seder plate, said the Arizal, that the Seder plate has on it, that the Seder plate is made of, these 10 parts represent the 10 Sfirot. And each one needs to go in a specific spot because of the particular Sfirot that they represent. And he explains as follows. The 3 matzahs represent the 3 intellectual Sfirot, which are Chachma. Chachma is insight, Bina, understanding, and Da'at, appreciation. There are 3 Sfirot without getting into the detail. The ability to come up, be creative, come up with new ideas, new insight, that is Chachma. There's the ability to understand and analyze, that is Bina. And then there is the ability to appreciate, value something, recognize something, relate to things, that is called Da'at. And so the 3 matzahs that we have represent these 3 intellectual Sfirot. And then, above these 3 matzahs, representing these 3 intellectual Sfirot, go 6 other items, representing the 6 emotional Sfirot. And they go as follows. And they match the shape of the Sfirot. The first of the emotional Sfirot is Chesed, kindness. Kindness goes on the top right. Because kindness runs along these 3 lines usually of the Sfirot. Kindness runs along the right side, the Kav HaYamin, the right side of the Sfirot. It's the giving side. And so it goes on the top right. Then there is the Gevura, discipline. Discipline is the opposite of kindness. Discipline represents the left side, and it goes on the top left. And then, below them both, we have Tiferet, or balance, that balances the kindness and the discipline. And so it is in the middle between the Chesed and Gvura. So you essentially have a triangle. You have on your top right, Chesed, kindness. On your top left, Gvura, discipline. And below, in the middle, you have Tiferet, balance, creating this triangle. Then, the next 3 Sfirot are Netzach. Netzach, again, is you have then below it a second triangle. In your lower triangle, on your top right, you have Netzach, motivation, drive. Then you have, on your top left, you have Hod, submission. And then, joining and merging them both, you have Yesod, or connection. So this Yesod, or connection, that balances the drive and motivation and the submission, or the limiting your motivation. And you connect, don't overdo it, don't do too little, you find the balance. So that sits in the middle. So essentially, these 6 Sfirot sit as 2 triangles. Chesed on the top right, Gvura top left, Tiferet in the middle, and then on the second triangle, Netzach on the top right, Hod on the top left, and Yesod in the middle. So, says the Arizal, 6 items on your Seder plate represent these 6 midot. And so therefore, they must sit in a similar kind of triangles, 2 triangles. So you put on the top right of your Seder plate, you put your Zeroah, your meat, your roasted meat, the shank bone or the chicken neck that's roasted, you put on your top right. It represents Hashem's might, Hashem's miracles, Hashem's kindness that he took Israel out of Egypt. Then on your top left, you put the egg. The egg, the second cooked food, represents the destruction of the temple. It represents Hashem's discipline. So it goes on the top left of your triangle. And then below them, in the middle, on the bottom of your triangle, goes the maror, the bitter herbs, which is the balance between kindness and discipline. Why are bitter herbs the balance between kindness and discipline? So it is explained that there are two types of sadness. There is sadness that we call in Hebrew atzvut, that can be translated as depression. That is a sadness that slows you down, that makes you lazy, that shuts you down and makes you not function. Then, however, there is another kind of sadness that in Hebrew we call merirut. Merirut means bitterness. Bitterness means you're upset about something, but upset about something where you are driven to do something about it and change it and stop whatever is bothering you. Stop whatever is getting you upset. Two different attitudes. You can be sad and depressed and lethargic and not be doing anything. You can be upset and driven, angry, motivated. And so the maror, bitterness, is that second type. It is, yes, negative, but is the negativity that drives you, that gets you going, that builds you up. And therefore it is a balance between the kindness, the right side, and the discipline on the left side. Then below them, says the Arizal, on your Seder plate, you should have another triangle. On the right side of this triangle, you will place your charoset. The charoset, which represents the mortar that Israel made and the buildings that Israel built in Egypt, those pyramids perhaps, maybe not, we don't know. But those buildings that Israel built in Egypt, yes, we worked very hard, but you know what we achieved? Do you know how much we built? Do you know how much we accomplished? And that is our motivation. That is our netzach, the sphere of motivation. And then on the top left of your bottom triangle, the Arizal says you put your karpas, your vegetable. The vegetable represents the hard labor, the difficult, vegetables grow in the ground. It represents our working with the ground, the hard labor, the struggles. That is the hod, the submission, where you are forced to do things that perhaps you don't want to do. And then at the center in the middle, we place our chazeret, which is the romaine lettuce. Again, maror. We have two marors placed on the Seder according to the Arizal. One that is used when we eat the maror, and one that is used later when we make our sandwich of matzah and maror. But we have twice maror because they represent the two centers, the two bottoms of the triangles. So now you have three matzahs representing the three intellectual sirot on the bottom. They go below. You have the six items on top of your Seder plate in two triangles. The top triangle has the roasted meat, the egg, and the maror, the bitter herbs. And the bottom triangle has the charoset, the vegetable, and again, the chazeret, or the maror, the bitter herbs. And then the 10th sphira is malchut. Malchut is the power of creation. And that is represented by the plate itself. The plate itself is the 10th item. That is the sphere of creation. And interestingly, the word for plate in Hebrew is ka'ara. Ka'ara. Now, ka'ara, the Arizal tells us, is the same letters as akara. Akara can mean two different things. Akara can mean infertile, and akara can mean, from the word ikar, the foundation or the principle. And the Arizal says that our matriarch Rachel is represented in the sphere of Malchut, and she was both an akara as infertile. It took her a number of years till she had her children. And she is also the one who is the akara, the foundation of the home, the foundation of Israel. She has both of those things. And that is the power to create, which can sometimes be infertile. Sometimes it takes time to create. It's not easy to create. But then when you create, that source of creation becomes the foundation of everything. So that is our plate that underlies everything that we have. So those are the 10 sfirot as they are found on the Seder plate. So because in the Arizal's order, the matzah does not sit on your Seder plate. The matzah sits on the Seder plate, but it doesn't sit at level with the other items. The matzah sits on the Seder plate, and then on top of the matzah, you place the other 6 items. Now, between each matzah, we put a cloth. The Arizal says to put a cloth. The reason to put a cloth between each matzah is in order because each matzah represents a different sphira. You don't want to mix them. Therefore, there should be a separation between them. That is why you can buy these cloths that have kind of 3 little spaces within them. For the 3 matzahs, there should be cloth between them. And then there is a cloth on top that you can use to separate the matzah and the 6 items that go on top of it that represent the emotions, that represent the midot, and they sit on the top. And one final important point that the Arizal makes is, why is it that the matzah goes below and the other 6 items go on top? And the Arizal explains, because the matzah represents the keli, the vessel. And the other 6 items represent the orot, the lights. What does that mean? So in Kabbalah it explains that everything that exists has 2 parts to it. It has its life force, its energy, and then it has its matter, the thing that holds it. Everything is made up of a vessel and something inside the vessel. One without the other doesn't work. If you have, and we did a class, we've spoken about this before, I believe, but if you have a cup and you have something inside the cup, just the water without the cup won't work. But the cup without the water is empty. In the same way, each of the sfirot, are made up of both orot, lights, and vessels. The matzah representing the intellect, the ideas, they are the intellectual side, they are the vessels. They are able to hold, to contain. And that's why they're big. You can put things on them. They'll crack easily, so be careful. But but you can put things on them. The other things, the 6 other items are all orot. Those are all energies. And those are all things that go into the vessels. And so therefore they sit on top. And so that is the mystical significance of the Seder plate. Each item on the Seder plate is very unique and has a particular purpose and particular representation. Although, as we said, each of those things are needed at the Seder and have halachic value as well. But each item also has a deep mystical significance too. So I wish you all a kosher and happy Passover. Again, just a quick reminder, we're not doing class the next